Hi everybody and welcome back to Coachy TV. In this video we're going to dissect the last microcycle of our general preparation phase for the cross-country season. General prep is the longest part of your training year. It's where you really do focus on basically getting your athlete, either you or the athlete you're coaching, fit enough to do more intense work later on and be prepared for the meets when you get to that point of the season. Fortunately, where I'm coming from you in Florida, it was just decided probably about 10 days ago that we are going to be allowed to have a high school season, which is fantastic. And I wanted to kind of take everybody through how we were doing here as we finish up with our general preparation phase and then get into our specific preparation phase. If you are somebody who's watched this whole video series on planning the cross-country season, you'll remember that initially I did recommend having about a 11-week general preparation phase. Well, our state pushed back everything, including our state meet, by 1 week. So what I did was I added another week to general prep because that's where, if you're going to have more time, that's where you want to do it. So basically, I have a 24-week season macrocycle from beginning to end. That includes 12 weeks of general prep and then 12 weeks of what will be starting the week after this, which is specific prep, pre-comp, and the competitive phase. So if you're going to add to your season, that's where I would add it. That's where you get the most benefit. You don't really want to add anything more to specific prep, pre-comp, or comp just because of the way those energy systems do peak, and adding a little bit more in general prep really will benefit you. So what I'm going to show you here is the last week of our general preparation phase. It would have been the first week of specific prep had everything gone according to normal plan, but we got an extra week, so I used it where I thought made most sense. So dissecting the cross-country microcycle, last week of general prep, we're going to be looking at what does the last week of general prep look like in planning? What should it look like when you're sitting down and planning it out? But then what does it actually look like in practice, the actual workouts? I've got some videos. I did full workout videos that I'll put in the description down below for all the ones that I show you the video clips for, but also some workout metrics like paces on long runs and things like that, and some results from a time trial we did at the end of the week. So the planning part and how did it actually get executed. You're seeing here the 2020 Wharton Boys Cross Country Varsity team at the start of the season. We do change things up like most cross-country teams too based on how they did the week before. We've set this top 7 based on the last VO2 max check that we did, which was 2 miles best effort. This team did shuffle following our time trial at the end of the week a little bit. Some people moved around. One person moved up into varsity, but I didn't take a picture afterwards. So we're just going to kind of keep – I have this one here, and after our next VO2 max check, we'll shuffle it one more time before we get our racing season underway here. So let's go ahead and get right to it. I'm Kyle Giacono, the head boys cross country and track coach at Wharton High School in Tampa, Florida, and I have been for the last 7 years. If you'd like a closer look at my credentials, they are on the screen.
So since we are getting ready for a cross-country 5K here as a high school coach myself, you need to know the metrics of what you're doing, because otherwise planning general prep would look very different if you're getting ready for, say, an 800 or a half marathon or something like that. So the metrics of the 5K, if we look at this study that was released by Dr. Ingham in 2008, which looked at a bunch of different metrics to see who was it that was actually most likely to win the race, what was the deciding factor in who won the race, who got second, third, that kind of thing. And in the 5K, it's very clear, it was very clear, it was a single indicator of VO2 max. Whoever could run the fastest aerobically, which is what VO2 max is, who could use the most oxygen at race pace, wins 94.3% of the time. And this was a very long study that looked at a bunch of different things, as I mentioned. If this was, say, the 800, it would have been a different predictor. 1600, 1500 meter mile would have been a different predictor. Same thing for 10,000 meters. But that means that in terms of the 5K, we have to be doing a lot of things to get our VO2 max better, which shouldn't be too surprising considering it. But there's some things that you might think would be important that are not as important for the 5K based on the length of the race that we'll get to in a little bit. So if we look at the USA Track and Field Distance Curriculum, we will find that the 5K is run at 97% VO2 max, which makes a lot of sense. VO2 max, one of the best tests for it is 2 miles best effort. That's what I do. VO2 max checks 2 miles best effort. The 5K being a little bit longer is going to be run a little bit slower, 97% at race pace when done successfully. So probably why there is that very close association between VO2 max and winning and the pace at which you run VO2 max in the 5K. It's all sort of interconnected. And this study that was released by Dr. Matter and Dr. Hartman in 2018, they worked closely with the IAAF when they looked at specifically the 5K, sort of a second-by-second breakdown to see where energy was coming at any point of the race. They found that 4% of the energy was coming from the ATP and the phosphocreatine that was in the muscles, which is collectively called the alactic system, or without acid. They found that 10% of the energy is coming from the anaerobic glycolytic system, which we are not interested in training in the general preparation phase. I have some videos that talk about that in more detail that I'll put in the description down below. But 10% of the energy comes from that longer energy system that is quite fast, not as fast as the alactic system, but much faster than the aerobic system, but does have some potentially negative consequences too, depending on how you actually use it in a race. It's the idea of having a good race pace. And then the aerobic system, no surprise, is supplying the lion's share of the energy, 86%. The aerobic system is king in these longer races, so that shouldn't be a surprise to anybody. And then this law of training specificity, which says that every training session has a specific effect on the athlete, which may or may not be desired for the event. So that seems fairly simple, but there's a lot going on there. The idea being is, if you do workout A for somebody, you're going to get training effect or adaptation A. You do workout B, adaptation B is going to happen. But if adaptation B is bad for the event, then workout B isn't making you better. The idea being that just because you're training doesn't mean you're getting better based on the event. A fantastic workout for the marathon might be terrible for an 800-meter runner, and vice versa, and you have to kind of think about that. So one of the things to consider is, at the end of general prep, how can a complete microcycle with all needed aspects, needed at the time, as we said, hugely important, we need to train this really not important at this part of the year, but will be next week when we start specific prep, all needed aspects improve performance. That's what we really want to consider here. So what are those aspects, and which are the most important when deciding training? Well, two types of VO2 max, two ways to train VO2 max here, central and peripheral. We said this is 94.3% winning predictors. So these are, say, the critical aspects of general preparation cross-country training. Let's look just at central VO2 max improvement first. And it's basically improved with any general aerobic work done for at least 20 continuous or near continuous minutes. It's typically thought of as aerobic threshold running, but anything that is continuous or near continuous can improve central VO2 max. Basically, your heart rate being over 120 and not slipping out of that for about no more than 60 seconds. So something that's more intense, like VO2 max intervals, aerobic power, can improve central VO2 max if you do something like active recovery in between and their heart rate doesn't drop. Things like hill intervals can do this too, depending on how you actually execute them, but usually people associate aerobic threshold running and easy pace running with central VO2 max improvement. It generally improves as the body increases the ability to move oxygen from the heart outward. That's the central part, the heart. And every bit of this continuous type training is about moving oxygen from your heart outward. That includes a bigger left ventricle, or the part of your heart that pumps the blood outward. It includes more blood vessels, so your body can supply more oxygen to the working muscles. That's more mitochondria. That's more blood in general. More aerobic enzymes, those different things that can actually move the oxygen outward to where it needs to be. Peripheral VO2 max is, once it gets outward, what can your body do with it? And this improves with aerobic power, or what I sometimes call just VO2 max work, because aerobic power, VO2 max is 100% your fastest aerobic pace. Aerobic power is 98 to 101% current VO2 max. So I sometimes use those interchangeably, even though they are a little bit different in reality. It has to be done at that pace. If it's slower than 98%, then your body is not going to be put right at the edge of oxygen debt, and it's not going to do what we're going to say here in a second. And if you go too fast, the blood's going too fast past the working muscles, and it can't grab it at a rate that you need. And also, you're going to get an increased acid production. Acid is going to accumulate at a much higher level. Some of those muscles are going to shut down, so they're not going to use oxygen for that reason also. This aspect of VO2 max peripheral generally improves as the body increases the ability of working muscles to extract oxygen from the blood for use in the mitochondria. So basically, we work this to get the oxygen from the heart outward, but when it is outward at the working muscles, this type of training allows your muscles to take more of the oxygen in, right? So both of those things need to happen. If we don't move a lot of oxygen from the heart outward, then it doesn't matter how much oxygen can be extracted at the working muscles, and vice versa. If we move a ton of oxygen outward, but your working muscles can't use it, then your body just breathes it out and you didn't do it either. So that's why this is a two-pronged attack to improve overall VO2 max, and that 94.3% predictor of who's going to win the 5K. So these are critical aspects of general preparation general prep training for cross country. But there are two other aspects that are maybe a little bit less important: running economy and specific strength. Now, running economy, a lot of people think this is the key factor for cross country, but the thing is, the cross country race, while somewhat long, 3.1 miles, your general human being walking around can't run that very fast. Distance runners, that's really not that long. I mean, if you're doing a 90-minute long run and you're going, 10, 12 miles, 3.1 miles isn't really long. It's not the fuel source that's ever going to run out that causes you to lose a 5K. If we were to look at the 10K running economy, if we look at that same study we referred to earlier, the one by Ingham in 2008, running economy is the single biggest indicator for who wins the 10K. Okay, so you have to kind of get in your mind that the 5K is kind of that split point. Longer than that, and we have to develop running economy. Same thing if we look at things like the half marathon and the marathon and things like that. Fuel storage is a critical aspect, talking about hitting the wall and things like that. The 5K is short enough to where fuel should never be an issue. You run a 5K at race pace, you're burning about 300 to 400 calories. That's basically a granola bar, a couple Gatorades, something like that. You're not, unless you're in a starvation mode, that should not be the issue. But running economy does play a factor. It's a little bit smaller than central VO2 max, and central and peripheral VO2 max together, but it's something we should be training in general prep. And the slightly less important aspect of running economy will play into account when we look at this general preparation microcycle that I created here. Any general aerobic work improves running economy. If you're running, you're getting more economical, okay? But it's best done at lactic threshold, which is about 85% current VO2 max. This is a medium-paced workout continuous. This is here to say it varies with athlete and training. Somebody that's more trained, this might be higher. I've got a kid right now who can run a couple miles, 2 straight miles, 3 straight miles at his 85%, but then he can then afterwards go 2 miles at critical velocity, about 92%. His lactic threshold probably is better than 85% because he is so well trained. He's one of the best runners in the state. He finished 10th last year. I've also got a group of kids who just started working with us about 3 weeks ago, and this workout is really, really tough for them because their lactic threshold is probably a little bit less, probably closer to aerobic threshold or easy pace running, like 78 to 82%, what I call a moderate tempo, although that's not really a scientific term like lactic threshold is. So just keep that in mind when you're training somebody. Generally, this improves as the body uses the least amount of energy to move, point A to point B slower, just like fuel economy in your car. It includes several aspects such as fuel storage. Your body puts more fuel closer to the working muscles, especially at lactic threshold, but it's also muscle elasticity, which really has nothing to do with lactic threshold. Muscle elasticity, a type of strength, comes from specific strength runs, the last aspect of general preparation training. These are trained basically 2 different ways. Hill runs to improve muscle elasticity. Running up a hill is plyometric in nature. It makes your muscles more elastic, meaning as you hit the ground, you get more energy back for free. That's elastic strength and overall force production. And also what's called an alactic run, which improves as, which typically as flies, I like fly 30s, I think it's safe for a distance runner, to improve muscle coordination and synchronization. I should have put elasticity here. So specific strength also has an aspect of lactic threshold as you're doing it. In this week, you're going to see hill runs, and you're going to see alactic runs. You're going to see these things, but you're not going to see running economy for the reason that I said, and I'll explain that a little bit more, especially with the team that I have here. So these are the 4 main aspects of general preparation cross-country training. These 2 are critical. These 2 are a little bit less important. But what would the ratio be? What would make sense to actually do this as you break down? Let's go ahead and see where I get my thinking from. But this is the old question that a lot of people have in summer training for cross-country or winter training for distance track. Shouldn't we just be focusing on miles? There's sometimes this pushback from doing something like 2-mile pace workouts or hill training or fly 30s, which is not normally what you would think about with distance training. Shouldn't we just think about long runs, recovery runs, maybe the tempo runs here and there? Well, here's a reason why you might want to focus on it. Obviously, your team is your team, or your training is your training, but there are some things that I would definitely consider if this is your mentality. Miles are an indicator, okay? But they really only give you a number to track, okay? This is one of the things that coaches really like to talk about. When coaches get around and they start talking, they really kind of talk about what do you do in the peaking window the last couple weeks, what does your warm-up and cool-down look like, and how many miles do you run, as if somehow this gives you any indicator in where those miles come from, what type of miles you're running, what the team is, and why you might be running a different ratio of miles with somebody. it only gives you an indicator, but you don't know anything else about it. You just know a number. How many miles did they run? Did all of those miles come as aerobic threshold? Did all of those miles come as something else? Are they including some kind of cross-training in there too, like biking or swimming? It only gives you a number, and it's a very small aspect of what it actually is, but it's something to consider. Oh, I run more miles than that team does, or that team runs more miles than I do, or whatever. But there's a lot more to consider with that, and there's a lot on the screen here, but I'm going to take you through all of it, I promise. There is evidence that if you only focus on aerobic threshold or easy pace runs, continuous runs, basically just focusing on miles, you can actually stunt or regress in beneficial adaptations, especially the more trained a runner is, okay? And there's sort of a sliding scale here. Somebody who's older, say a semi-professional or professional athlete in their late 20s, early 30s, isn't going to be doing something that a high school athlete is doing, but there's got to be a natural ratio. There's got to be a mix. And I don't know how to pronounce the person who was the principal author of the study in 2007, but it's called Aerobic High-Intensity Intervals Improves VO2 Max More Than Moderate Training, okay? Other results have bared this out, but this is the first one I believe that really sort of bared this out. If you don't want to trust what I'm about to explain on this, go ahead and find the study yourself and look at it, but this is my takeaway from the study. They took 40 healthy, moderately trained men for 8 weeks, so got to consider that. 40 is pretty good for a human study. Humans don't generally like to be studied, so that's pretty good. They were relatively healthy. They were moderately trained, meaning this was not people running for the first time, and this is part of why I say the more trained you are, this idea of not just focusing on miles is important. It was men for whatever that means. I'm sure that it wouldn't be that different for women. We don't really function all that differently, especially in general preparation training, but something to consider. And it's only 8 weeks. As I mentioned before, a real general preparation should be longer than that by at least, maybe 10, 12, 13 weeks. But, it wasn't bad. It shows where it was going, at least you could trend. Total weekly volume was the same, which was about 40 miles per week for all 4 of these groups, but they were randomly placed into these 4 groups, okay? So blindly, randomly put into these. Group 1 was just long, slow distance workouts only. They did it based on 70% max heart rate, not VO2 max, but this is basically easy pace type running. So all they did throughout the entire week, 6 days on, and they only ran 6 days a week with 1 day off in this group, but this whole study, all they did was this type of running. It was evenly split up throughout the week. You would probably want to, if you were really training them, have one true long run in there, but that's the way the study was done. There was a group that was lactic threshold. So they did 3 workouts per week at 85% max heart rate. Not truly lactic threshold, but that's the closest thing you could do. And the other half of them were 3 long distance, same thing that this group was doing essentially, added up to the same miles total. There was group 3, which was 15-15-second intervals, 15 seconds on, 15 seconds off, with the on being at 90 to 95% max heart rate. This is very close basically to VO2 max or aerobic power. And the other 3 workouts were also long, slow distance, so the same thing this group was doing. And then group 4 was 4 times 4 minute intervals. So it was 4 of them, 4 minutes on, 4 minutes off, 90 to 95%, so the same intensity as the 15-15 group, but it was more continuous in nature at that VO2 max about range, aerobic power, and then 3 long, slow distance. After 8 weeks, group 4 had the biggest average increase in VO2 max, 7.2% increase in VO2 max, followed by group 3, 5.5%. As we saw from that study by Ingham in 2008, if you wanted to do best in the cross country or in the 5K, regardless if it was cross country or on a track, you wanted to be in group 4. This is the hardest workout by far of all of these. This is much harder than these other workouts are, but it got the best improvement, 7.2% improvement. So theoretically, if they all were starting at the same VO2 max, everybody from group 1 for the most part would be, group 4 would for the most part be in first place, and everybody from group 3 would be after that. It should be 1 through 10 here, 1 through 10 here, with 94.3% accuracy based on that Ingham study, because these 2 improved the most in that order. Interesting to note, group 2 had no improvement in VO2 max. That's the lactic threshold group. And even more interestingly, group 1 was slightly worse when they started, negative 0.2% VO2 max. Now, the authors even said that's not really statistically significant, but the fact of the matter is it did go down. There wasn't enough intensity here in either group 1 or group 2 to move their VO2 max. Now, I think the key reason for that is these were moderately trained people. If they were brand new runners, then they might have gotten more improvement than this, but moderately trained, and that's the idea of, if somebody's more trained, you can't simply focus on miles. You just can't if you really want to get that improvement. Now, remember, it was only 8 weeks. Maybe this had gone out to 12, 15, whatever. You might have seen a little bit of an improvement in Group 1 and Group 2, but you would have probably continued to see more improvement from 3 and 4. So that's really why you want to consider not just focusing on miles. But what's really a good ratio for this? Because you would not really, in reality, want to go and do this 3 times a week. There's probably a better way of doing it, and you probably would want to mix in a lactic threshold run because you do want some more running economy, and there's some other things that are not being taken care of here, like specific strength. So what's a good ratio to kind of look at for this? So what I think a really good ratio is, especially for high school kids at this point, this is what I've sort of come up with as a general rule of thumb, and I'll tell you where and why I came up with this. This is just mine, kind of leaning on some other people's work here. So Dr. Jack Daniels, one of the, I would say, fathers of distance running in the world, if not just the United States also. He's written on this topic in his book, Daniels Running Formula. He advocates for the following. Tempo run, what he calls a tempo, which is a lactic threshold run, workouts should not make up more than 10% of the miles per week. Now, he doesn't say that you can't do more than one tempo run a week. He basically talks about knowing your why, and if you think that's important, go ahead and do it. But he's saying in any one sitting, it shouldn't be more than 10 miles per week, okay? Intervals, what he calls, are actually VO2 max aerobic power. If you look in his book and see what he's talking about, workouts should not make up more than 8% of the miles per week. Again, doesn't mean that you can't do more than one, but that one workout, that part of the workout should not make up more than 8% of the miles per week. They're more intense than tempo runs, so it makes sense. Repetitions, what he calls repetitions are anaerobic glycolytic work, you know, special endurance 1, special endurance 2, intensive tempo, those types of things, should not make up more than 5% of the miles per week. So same thing before. He actually sometimes advocates for more trained athletes, potentially mixing up a tempo and a repetition workout. I don't like doing that for high schoolers. Your advanced ones can do it, but most high schoolers cannot do that. College athletes definitely can do that. That's why you'll never see me advocate for a ladder workout that includes different things like, you know, VO2 max and then repetitions or tempo, just because most high school kids really can't handle that, but some could depending on your team. Maybe especially at the end of the season when you have maybe a smaller group in track. He does not specify anything for hill or fly 30 runs or these specific strength runs. So if you do each of these workouts 1 per week, which is what I typically recommend for a high schooler, 1 per week, that leaves you 77% of your mileage. If you do at the high end for aerobic threshold, warm-up, and cool-downs and active recoveries, which also kind of goes into that bulk easy miles here. So this is the framework I use when setting up ideal mileage, especially for general prep, but I really kind of keep this in mind all the way through the year. In general prep, actual repetitions, like he's talking about here, anaerobic glycolytic work is not happening due to the peaking window. I talk about this in specific preparation videos that I'll put some in the description down below about why that is, but basically it's how that system peaks is much shorter than the aerobic system, about half as long. So what I do is I lump strength runs, these ones he didn't talk about, the hills and fly 30s, into this category of repetitions in general prep, and also later on in the year when I look at this, because they're serving us to not get too far away from speed or fast running without actually accumulating acid. So my why for doing this fits into what he says your why should be for repetition. So that's part of the idea of knowing your why, which is really important. So that's where those all sort of fit in. So my mileage ratio is typically going to be this. For general prep specifically, it kind of gets a little bit different, but this sort of could be used for almost all of the season. Aerobic threshold, ancillary miles, that what could be as low as 77% based on the Jack Daniels ratio. I usually like that to make it 75 to 85%. I'm typically at the high end, especially in general prep. Later on in the season, it might be more like 75%, depending on how intense your week is, and if you've got races and things like that that change your profile. Lactic threshold, 8 to 10%. Basically, where he advocates to for any one workout. I really would never do more than one tempo workout per week, just because, as we talked about before, it's not as specific for the cross-country 5K, and it's definitely less specific for, say, the 3,200 meter in track, the 1,600 or the 800 meter in track. This would become more important if you were dealing with college runners doing the 6K, 8K, 10K. If you're dealing with college athletes, more college men in reality. And then you've got aerobic, VO2 max aerobic power, 5 to 8%. So kind of in that same range that he's talking about. And I say these strength runs, what he calls repetitions. In general prep, 1 to 5%. It's very rare going to get up to 5% just doing hills and fly 30s in general prep. When I switch to specific prep next week, and I'll do these breakdowns of weeks every once in a while, this would not just be strength runs, but it would include this anaerobic glycolytic work, the repetitions that he's talking about. So that's not any kind of magic formula. It's looking at somebody who I definitely respect his opinion, looking at it and figuring out what my why is for the events that I'm getting ready for here in the cross-country general prep, just the 5K. You might look at it and see it a little bit differently, so please don't take this as some kind of like gospel or something like that, because it's not. It's simply what works for me in my situation. Yours might be a little bit different. So let's see what the actual microcycle. All right, so here's the last microcycle general prep that we're dissecting in this video. So this is from August 16th to the 22nd. Official practice for us in Florida starts on Monday. I'm recording this on Sunday the 23rd. So this is, again, we're transitioning from one part of the season to the next. An example of what you could be doing is something like this: a recovery run of 45 minutes at the beginning, about 6 miles for your top boys. A medium hill intervals times 5, which would give you that would give you about 1 mile of strength run or repetitions or whatever you want to call it. And these colors are coordinated with the little key that I showed you previously. Medium hills, I say about 60 to 90 seconds. The hill that I use is about 350 meters, so it's a little bit over a mile, but it's about right. With a 3-mile cool down, so we count those in aerobic threshold running. A long run of 90 minutes. High volume at this part of the year, so for your top boys, as a 12-mile run. VO2 max intervals times 4. Long VO2 max at this point. You're about to get ready to start actually racing here in the next little bit, so especially for those that can handle it, but you can also do times 5 1200s. Actually, I'm going to show you some results in a video where we had some doing 16s, some doing 1200s, some doing thousands, and some doing 800s in the same workout. So, but it's about 6,000 meters, which is 3.75 miles, except for the times 4 mile people are obviously doing 4 miles. Add VO2 max aerobic power with the 3-mile cool down. About 25 minutes is what I recommend for everybody except your top boys. That would get about 3 miles in 25 minutes on a cool down. Alactic fly 30s times 10, that's about a half mile. It's really more like 600 meters, but that plus a little bit extra from the medium hills gets you to about 1.5 miles total, with 4 miles in the back end at aerobic threshold. A recovery run of 45 minutes, 6 miles. And then this week we've got a time trial of 3 miles in the back end, just to kind of get people used to running again. Again, I mentioned we reshuffled the varsity lineup with this. Potentially 3 miles in the back end. When we did this, I actually I flipped these just because for our situation, we're not allowed to train with our kids on Saturday during conditioning, just because of everything that's happened weird this year. So I did have to flip that. It would be ideally more like this if you were to do it correctly, but I did have to make that change just because you got to follow the rules, obviously. So based on the ratio check, this is a 58-mile week for your top boys. I would recommend doing it based on time for your other ones, and it'll end up being about right for all the different ratios. So basically, before we actually get to the ratio check, part of my goal, or our goal at our team at Wharton High School, is the second half of general prep was to increase the percentage of aerobic power VO2 max miles in the weekly microcycle. I have a whole video based on knowing your why and what I did with this group this year. I had a very new group. Everybody but my top 2 was very new to this type of running. So I needed to do a lot of central VO2 max with that group early in the microcycle, and then I needed to increase the peripheral VO2 max after when they could do it. I'll put that video about knowing your why in the description down below. You might have a different reason, but this is why this week is going to look a little bit different based on the ratio check. So if we look at aerobic threshold and other miles, it's 58.5 miles, which is 83.6%. It's at the high end, which I said I normally am for general prep, so it checks out. Here's an issue. We have no lactic threshold miles. None. That does not follow my general ratio for this, but if we look at aerobic power, it's 7 miles. That's 12.2% over 2 different workouts. If I were to say where I would normally do with this, that normally would not follow my ratio that I mentioned before. Strength run has 1.5 miles, which is 2.6%. That checks out. So why am I comfortable with this? Because I know my why. Right down here, as I said before, this particular team early on did more lactic threshold running than I normally would have done with the group, along with a lot more continuous easy pace running. But now at the end of the end of general prep, they are much more ready for aerobic power, which, as we said, directly impacts performance, the peripheral VO2 max. We worked on the central early, and we're obviously still working on it a lot with all this continuous running, but I needed to move this. And again, remember, lactic threshold best trains running economy, especially the storage of fuel, which is important to the cross-country 5K. If it wasn't important, we would never do this, but it's not critical like these other aspects are that we're dealing with. So I'm comfortable with this, knowing that I'm not following all of my ratio checks that I just set up in the previous slide, because I know my why. As I said, it's my guide. It's not my gospel. It's not my I absolutely have to do this and I have to tear up every single microcycle that doesn't fit in perfectly. Like I said, you probably are going to have a different way of looking at this that doesn't fit what I think is a good ratio, because you know your team better than anybody else. I know my team better than anybody else, so we shouldn't be doing the same things. We should do it based on our team itself, and for this part of the season, I know that my team needs these 7 miles of aerobic power VO2 max, and they don't need lactic threshold. They just did a lactic threshold run the week before this, and they're going to do a lactic threshold run the week after this. So I'm still getting them in, but every single week doesn't have to fit that profile. So let's go ahead and see some of the workouts from the week itself. Alright, so this is the last rep of our medium hill workout for the week. I'll put the whole video in the description down below, and I have the GoPro on the back of my head, the idea being of trying to give them somebody to chase here. I'm a little bit ahead of the group who's down at the bottom of the hill, so just going to have us take off here on the last one. And again, it's about 350 meters. It's not so important the actual distance as long as you're staying consistent from a starting and finishing point. And on this, as you can see, they're going to have to be moving pretty quickly to catch me, because I've got about maybe 300 or 30 maybe meters on them at this point, so I'm probably running about 310 meters, something like that. So give them somebody to shoot for, give them the target here to get with all the way to the top. You want this to be about 60 seconds to maybe, I don't know, 90 seconds. You don't want it to be much longer than this. There's our top boy going by, really good knee drive on this. Here comes our number 2 boy along with it. I really like, again, look at this, really good knee drive, good arm swings. They're not way up top as they're doing it. Good running mechanics as they go through. Something that's really good about hills is they do help improve running mechanics. Here comes our number 3 as he comes on with us, and our number 4 also really starts to move here on this last rep. Again, you can see the same sort of really good mechanics here, good knee drive. As they're doing it, they're not really up top. Their arms are really good arm carriage as they come through. On this last rep, give a lot of effort as they get all the way to the top of this hill. So that's basically what the last rep should look like. Pretty challenging. It'll be in the description down below to have a closer look at it. So let's go ahead and take a look at the long run, which was done on the very next day. This is our athlete Alex right here. I'm just going to show you a couple of them. So Alex is, on this day, she had never run more than 10 miles continuously in her life, and she knew that she'd be able to do it based on, excuse me, I'm looking at the wrong time here. Gave a sneak peek at our time trial results there. Alex right here knew that she was going to be able to get very close if she ran on the fast end of her long run pace, and she really wanted to try and do this for her aerobic threshold. She can be from 9:40 to 8:55 if she's running for 90 continuous minutes. If it was at 9 flat, she'd be able to, and she was able to go 8:58 on this, so a really good day for Alex as a pure distance runner. This is the type of thing that she obviously really, really likes, and I was really pleased that she was able to do this the day after a medium hill interval, as you saw from that, or if you went back and looked at it. It's a pretty intense day, and I like doing something like this, long, slow, continuous afterwards to kind of help them reset. Let's go ahead and look at another athlete. This is our middle distance girl, Brooke, to kind of show you how 2 different people can do it. The interesting thing is Brooke and Alex are basically exactly the same at this point as we're looking at, same VO2 max of 8:14. So Brooke could also get over 10 miles, and she did. And this is something to kind of look at. I do have the mile splits for Brooke on this that we can kind of look at. So we're looking for 9:40 to 8:55. Little fast in range, too fast, little fast, very too fast, very too fast, way too fast, way too fast, very too fast, very too fast. The little bit extra, she didn't go 11 miles, but she did end up going 10.36. So that obviously means that she went a little bit out of her range of 8:41. We didn't want her to be faster than 8:55. This is something you do have to watch a little bit with, especially middle distance runners, especially in the back end. It's great that they can do this. Middle distance runners, as they start to feel good, can potentially be their own worst enemy because they have more of the glycolytic system available to them. Brooke really didn't suffer any ill effects that we'll see on the next day when we did VO2 max intervals, but it's something that you do want to watch if your middle distance runners are more fresh. Your distance runners are more likely to hit right in their range and follow the same sort of pace. And I think Alex, if I remember correctly from her splits, was no slower than 9:02, but no faster than 8:56. So she was kind of right in there all the way through. So just something to consider with your middle distance runners as you are looking at their workouts. So this is one of our boys, Danny, who actually he ran basically with Brooke the same sort of thing, and he had sort of a really rough second half of it. As a distance runner, if you start getting out of your range here, especially at 8:20 when Danny is, let's see where Danny's supposed to be. Danny is a little bit faster in terms of VO2 max than Brooke, which is who he ran with that day. He's 6:06 VO2 max. Brooke is 6:14. He can be as fast as 8:45 and as slow as 9:25 to be in his range. But when a distance runner starts getting all the way down into an 8:20, that really starts to affect them potentially a little bit more. It puts more of a strain on their aerobic system, which is their strength, and you can see Danny definitely suffered here on the last mile specifically. He's supposed to be 9:25. He held together for this one, but he really was not feeling it here. Now, obviously, this is only for 0.03, so don't look at that 11. But you'll see when we look at the intervals for Danny the next day, he did have a little bit of an issue going into it. So you do need to watch this as your kids are getting more fit, especially at the end of general prep. These 90-minute runs are going to feel like nothing, so you do want to make sure you don't see overtraining or anything like that. So here is one of our boys, Ethan Stennett. He is not... I think he's got a little fast twitch in him. I haven't really been able to characterize him yet. He's a sophomore, so he still has some time. He's a little bit slower than Brooke and Alex. He can be from 10 to 9:15. We will see that Alex went 9.5 miles for 90 minutes, which is 9:29, which is right sort of, maybe, fast middle of his range. And if I remember correctly from his splits, he was also very consistent all the way through it. So Ethan had a great day on this, and you'll see from the workout the next day, he also had a great day on his intervals. So those are all the long runs. Let's go ahead and take a look at the interval workout video. So here's our VO2 max interval workout. As I said, we've got, I think it's 8 different groups here this day. Some doing miles, some doing 1,200, some doing thousands, and some doing 800s based on their current fitness level. We like to do this early on in the day, hence the sunrise that you see that's going on, which actually was kind of a pretty sunrise that day. But you see a bunch of different groups. They know what's important about the rest and everything. You see them group up. There's our number 3 leading our second tier group doing 1,200s. The 2 young ladies that went by are doing thousands. The boys just went by are also in our number 3's group here doing 1,200s. The ladies that also went by were doing 800s. Another kid doing 1,200s. Kind of getting the right workout. We've got somebody that was just coming behind me that is on her recovery in between the active recovery. So kind of the right workout for the right people as they come through. Here's a group of people doing 1,200s. Our middle distance and distance ladies as they come through, as well as our kid Danny going by. And then you're going to end up seeing our number 1 boy come through at like 5:03, 5:02, something like that, for him doing his miles. And then our number 2 boy, Tommy, coming through at something like 5:18 for his last of these. So basically, there's a lot of chaos that kind of happens on the track when these are happening, but it's kind of the right workout for the right person as they go through. So here are the results from that workout. Yellows indicate somebody that's a little bit out of their zone on the slow end. I break this down in detail in the video in the description down below on it. But I want to talk about some of the people who I did show you. Now, our top 2 boys hit every single one just like they're supposed to, 100%, 98%. I want to show some of the people that we talked about here. So Danny, this was the young man who went out and struggled in that longer one, and he definitely struggled on this day, was only able to hit one of them. So we talked about this a little bit afterwards, this idea of not doing too much on those long runs. They're supposed to be very easy. I'd rather you do that because you don't want it to negatively impact the next day. That's sort of the idea. Now, as I said, Alex was missed consistency on Her long run that day, she was 4:42, which is definitely in her zone. She wasn't too fast or too slow on all these, which is exactly what you want from a distance runner. Brooke was the middle distance runner who I said maybe got a little bit outside of herself on those, but she had a great day here, so she is probably ready for a new test, a time trial like we have later on in this week. So I'm perfectly fine knowing that, hey, her fastest one was her last one, so it must not have been too much for her. So that's the idea of what are the results showing you, what is the actual plan, but what is this actually in practice? And here's this young man, Ethan S., the last person I showed you. His last one was his slowest, so maybe he got a little bit outside of himself on that 90-minute run, but maybe he was totally comfortable right here at 4:50. And you'll see when we get to the time trial, he had a great day on that too, so he must not have been too overly fatigued. So these are some of the things that you can be looking for with your group when you're looking at their actual workout results. So here's the workout video from the Fly 30s, which will also be in the description down below. This is super, super fast, what distance runners typically don't do a lot of. Two of our young ladies coming all the way through on their rep. I do like to record these. This is what it looks like if you're wearing the GoPro on your head during the actual rep itself. Not too complicated. Run as fast as you can for 30 meters and then safely and slowly decelerate as you go through it. And then you end up timing some of the ones at the very, very end, which is what you're going to see right here. And then I'll show you some of the results as you go through it. The whole video will be in the description down below. It's kind of a fun day for the kids. It's not normally what they're used to. It's still working on specific strength that you would want to be working on with your distance runners at this time of the year. Muscle, elasticity, plyometric type stuff, force production. Those are the things that you really want to kind of be focusing on also for specific strength. To accent what you're doing with the VO2 max development. This will be the last one I'll show, and then I'll show you the results itself. Whole video is in the description down below. So, here are the results from the day. Yellows indicate where the people PR'd. This is the week we did it on August 20th. We had 11 of the 23 kids run their best time of their life here when their volume is still very high. As you saw, this is the end of a pretty challenging week. 2 kids that indicated here in the green ran their season best times. So 48% of the kids PR'd here in this workout, even though it was pretty high volume, and 57% ran their best time of the season. So pretty good considering the day before was those 2-mile intervals. 2 days before that was the long run of 90 minutes, and then 3 days before was the medium hills. So next up, I will show you the time trial results. All right, so here's the time trial results. We did a 3-mile at a place called Lake Park on the 21st. It would have been better if I'd been able to wait to the 22nd, but as I mentioned earlier, we do have to follow our county's protocol. I'm not going to show you guys the recovery run. Basically, it fits the same sort of thing as the long run in terms of the ratio. But I did use this time trial to reset numbers. You can do that based on the percentages. The 3-mile is basically the 5K in terms of the percentage that you run it at. So our number 1 boy, Jared, here ran 15:33 for 3 miles, which is 5:11. Here are his mile splits, very consistent, 5:10, 5:10, 5:13. If you go and you do all the math, convert it, and figure it out, that means his VO2 max has gone from 5 flat down to 4:49, so he got 11 seconds faster. So his workout paces are going to get faster here, so here's his easy pace now and his aerobic power. Our number 2, Tommy, also had a good day, 16:47, 5:34, 36:37, very consistent on his mile splits, 5:11, which is 3 seconds faster. He reset his numbers. David ran his first ever 5K, so I'm very proud of the way that he did. We did keep his numbers from the last time that he ran his 2-mile VO2 max check, but a really good day for him. Then the core part of our group, what really makes or breaks a team is your 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 all the way down here. Those are the most important runners because not only do they end your team score, but they also push each other. Good day for this group too, nice and consistent. From Manny, Amir, Ethan M, and Matt S round up our top 7, and then Jensen, Matt B, and Danny make up the kids that are pushing our varsity top 7, so really good day. Danny, like I said, had a really tough week. Again, probably was still feeling some of the effects earlier on, so he did not reset his numbers either, but he still had a really good day. Would have been a PR in his 5K if you go ahead and do the standard conversion. Jared and Thomas, even though they reset his numbers, they would not be in the PR range. David, it was first ever. Manny, Amir, and Ethan M would be very close to their PR if you convert this to a 5K, not too far off. Matt S, that was his first ever 5K. Jensen would be PRing. He was a 25-minute 5K kid just this time last year, so really good improvement. Matt B is our freshman, very close to what his PR was when he was running in middle school. As I said, Danny would have been a PR. Our two young ladies here are running in the 20s if you convert this to a 5K to start the season. Didn't quite reset their numbers, but still a really, really strong day. They're a little bit new working with me, so they're still working on some race strategy and things like that where we can tighten up some of these things. I don't like the first mile being fastest if you've seen in my workouts and everything, so they're kind of getting used to kind of a different race approach. The last person I really want to talk about here is Ethan S, because I kind of showed you some of his workouts before. His PR is something like 21:30 in a 5K, so he's basically at his PR right now. His fastest mile was his last one. He really made up ground, and actually, if you were to line up what they actually ran in this time trial, he was actually ahead of both Brooke and Alex, two kids that historically he's been training behind. Even though his VO2 max is low behind them still, it really shows how much he has actually sort of improved, and he improved his workout ratios here too. So really smart race tactics. Ethan really did grow up. He's had a whole year of training with me, so again, he's kind of used to this idea of really going on that last mile as they're doing it. Actually, I do want to call attention to this young lady here, Eliza, ran 27:50. Just like Jensen, who had never gone under 25 before, Eliza had never run faster than 30 minutes in a 5K before, and she's obviously much faster than that if she's running 3 miles at 27:50. So really proud of this young lady and how she did on this. Just getting used to the fact that she is much faster than this time last year really does show great improvement from this young lady as they're doing it. Lulu is another person who also ran her first ever 5K here. So really good day for the whole group, really good week for the whole group. So I think you can kind of see where this is all going and how it all sort of is in terms of the practice. Let's go ahead and wrap. All right, so some key points to conclude this presentation. At this point, volume should be very high. We're still in general prep. It's one of the highest of the year. It's probably not the absolute highest. There was a week or two in there that was actually 60. But this is one of the highest volume points of the year. You're coming out of general prep where you're working mostly on the aerobic system and some specific strength. So the volume should be high, but you still have to have that good ratio that we talked about. It's not just about miles. That's an important aspect, but it's not the only aspect. You want to have a good ratio. For my team, I know I would include aerobic power VO2 max at the high end, as we saw, just to get that extra bit, because I know what my team needs, and it goes out of what I would normally do within every single week and doesn't have the lactic threshold, but it's what I know and what I believe my team really needs at this point. Things to look at for a distance runner, primarily at this point, watch for the consistency, the pacing on the aerobic runs. I showed you Alex's long run. She really did a fantastic job of that. Danny really kind of struggled with that, and it kind of messed up a lot of his weeks. So you do want to have that consistency. There was other things that potentially could have been affecting Danny at that point too, but these are the things you want to look for, and if you see that there's not, you might want to chat with the athlete about, is there something going on? Do you just feel fatigued or whatever? We're about to start the school year here in Florida, so maybe there's some stressors that are going on there. One thing also for a distance runner, reverse splitting VO2 max runs or time trials is a really important thing. Secondary point, you want to see some overall growth with specific strength runs, alactic and hill runs and that kind of thing. For a middle distance runner, my primary focus is to watch for steady growth on the strength runs. Basically, it's the opposite of a distance runner. Are they still kind of steadily increasing to basically show that they're handling the miles well? Because if you have a middle distance runner whose fly 30s or hill runs are just dying, they're not adapting probably to the long runs and the VO2 max and all the aerobic stuff very well. Secondary, I watch for improving consistency on pacing on those long runs, tempo runs, aerobic power, VO2 max intervals, and especially tests or checks. Not going out too fast. That's what they would have the tendency to do, or kind of get ahead of themselves when they do feel really good. Those are some of the things you might want to look for. That's what I look for with my group. So that is our last week of general preparation. If you like this video, please think about liking or subscribing, or hopefully both. I have some videos in the description down below that I mentioned that I would take a look at if you want some more detail. If you have any questions, please ask them in the comments down below. And until next time, this has been Coachy TV.